Have you ever been to a park that felt like it was actively trying to mess with you? I mean, seriously, a park that just takes the rulebook, rips it up, and sets it on fire. A place that feels less like a peaceful walk in the woods and more like you've just stumbled into a glitch in the Matrix. Well, today, we're going to Paris, but we're skipping the perfect, manicured lawns of the Tuileries. We're heading out to the edge of the city, to a place that was once its bloody, beating heart, and was then reborn as one of the strangest, most brilliant, and, most controversial public spaces on the entire planet. All right, let's get into this. So, here's the game plan for how we're going to crack the code of Parc de la Villette. First up, we're going to tackle the central mystery. What is this park even for? Then we're going to dig deep into its absolutely shocking origin story, a wild transformation from, you guessed it, blood to bamboos. After that, we'll decode the architect's totally radical blueprint and find the method in all this madness. Then we'll take a little virtual stroll through its tilted cubes in weird gardens and really try to figure out why this crazy experiment actually matters so much. And finally, we'll see how this whole story can actually change the way you look at the world around you.
All right, part one. I want you to imagine a park that seems to be about, well, nothing. And I'm not kidding. It really is like the Seinfeld of urban spaces. And trust me, that's not an insult. It's actually the master key to understanding this entire brilliant place.
And here's our first big clue. It comes from the architect himself, Bernard Tschumi. Right off the bat, he's basically telling us, hey, you, whatever you think a park is supposed to be, just forget it. Throw it all out. We're so used to this 19th century idea of a park as this perfect, idealized slice of the countryside dropped into the middle of a noisy city. A quiet escape. But Tschumi says, nope, not here. La Villette was designed from day one to be a park for the 21st century. A park about doing things, about events, about culture, about human beings bumping into each other. So picture this. You get off the metro way out in the 19th arrondissement of Paris. You walk into this absolutely massive 55-hectare space. I mean, this place is huge. It's the biggest green space in all of Paris. But as you start to look around, you get this weird feeling. Something's off. There are no big statues of old generals on horseback. You don't see any of those perfectly arranged, color-coded flower beds that Paris is so famous for. There's no grand central fountain that everything is organized around. The whole thing just feels intentionally scattered.
And then you see them. Everywhere, dotted across the entire park, laid out on a perfectly rigid grid. Are these things? They're bright, fire engine red. They're made of steel, and they all kind of look like variations on a theme. Like someone took a basic red cube and just started pulling it apart, twisting it, and sticking it back together in the strangest possible ways. There are 26 of them, and they're called folies, which is French for follies. And sure, some of them have a job. There's a cafe here, a first aid station there, but a lot of them, they just are. They're just these weird red things in a field.
And that, right there, leads us to the million-dollar question. What is the point of all this? In a city like Paris, a city that is practically synonymous with order and beauty and elegance, why would anyone build a gigantic park that seems to celebrate chaos, that seems fragmented, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit pointless? It feels like a punchline to a joke you didn't hear. But it's not a joke. And the answer, the real reason this park looks and feels the way it does, is buried in a past so dark, so industrial, you would not believe it's the same piece of land. To get the design, we first have to get our hands dirty. So let's jump into section 2. We're about to fire up the time machine, because for more than 100 years, this place was not about concerts and picnics. It was the dead opposite. It was a city within a city, a massive industrial machine built for one single, brutal purpose: slaughter.
This timeline tells a wild story. For over a century, this was basically the stomach of Paris. It was a massive slaughterhouse and meat market complex set up by Napoleon III himself. Fast forward to the mid-20th century, and a huge project to rebuild and modernize the place goes so badly, it becomes a national scandal, literally known as the Scandal of La Villette. By 1974, the whole operation shuts down for good, leaving behind this enormous industrial wasteland. And for 8 years, it just sits there until the government decides to do something completely radical. Turn this symbol of industrial failure into a park for the future.
Just look at this comparison. It really shows you the insane scale of this transformation. Think about it. The site was literally cut in half by a canal. On one side, you had the giant cattle market, where thousands upon thousands of animals were bought and sold every day. And on the other side, that was the Cité de Sang, the City of Blood. That's where the actual killing happened. It was a grim, efficient, brutal place.
To turn that into a park that now welcomes 10 million people a year for music festivals and movie nights, it's one of the most incredible urban makeovers in modern history, hands down.
I want you to just let this number sink in for a minute. At its peak, around the turn of the 20th century, this place processed 5,000 oxen and 23,000 sheep every single day. This was not some quaint little butcher shop. This was an industrial-scale operation of death. The ground itself was soaked in blood and a century of violent history. So when the government decided to build a park here, they knew they couldn't just throw down some grass, plant a few trees, and pretend none of that ever happened. No, the design itself had to confront the site's violent, fragmented, industrial past head-on.
And that brings us directly to Section 3, and to the man who won the competition to design this impossible park, Bernard Tschumi. He was a Swiss-French architect, but at the time he was known more as a thinker, a theorist, than a builder. And he came in with this totally wild idea that was just perfect for this haunted piece of land, an idea called deconstruction. And this, my friends, is where we finally figure out what those weird red things are all about. Okay, deconstruction. It sounds super academic and intimidating, right? But stick with me, because the core idea is actually pretty simple. It's about taking things apart. It's about looking at all the traditional rules of architecture. You know, ideas like harmony, unity, form should always follow function, and then intentionally breaking them. You create clashes, you create fragmentation. It's not about making chaos just for the sake of it. It's about questioning our assumptions and creating a space that is wide open to new ideas, new uses, and totally unexpected moments. For Tschumi, this was the perfect philosophy for a site that was already a messy collage of industrial ruins, canals, and leftover buildings.
Okay, so here's the genius of the plan. It's so brilliantly simple. Tschumi didn't design one single unified park. No, he designed 3 completely separate systems, and then he just smashed them on top of each other. That's it. First, you have the points, that rigid, relentless grid of the 26 rep follies, providing this constant, repeating rhythm across the entire site. Second, the lines. This is a network of paths, everything from long, straight axes to a curvy, wandering path. And third, you have the surfaces, the big, open green lawns and themed gardens where all the activities are meant to happen.
And that is exactly how Tschumi himself sees it. He doesn't think of it as a park or a landscape. He thinks of it as one enormous building that he's taken apart and scattered across 55 hectares. The incredible energy of this place comes from the collision of those 3 systems. The rigid grid of points crashes into the flowing network of lines, which crashes into the open fields of the surfaces. It's a system that's literally designed to generate conflict, surprise, and spontaneity. You're walking on a path, and boom, it slams into a weird red folly right next to a sunken garden. Nothing is blended. Everything is just superimposed. And that is the entire point.
Okay, so that's all the big brain theory. But what does it actually feel like to walk around in this place? For Section 4, let's take a quick virtual tour and see how this abstract idea actually translates into a real-world, boots-on-the-ground experience.
Let's start with those follies. So they're all based on this idea of a 10.8 meter cube that's been pulled apart. But every single one is unique. And some of them, like the one you see right when you walk in, has a very clear job to do. It's the information booth and the ticket office. Form follows function. Makes sense. But then you'll just be wandering and you'll stumble upon another folly, like the Belvedere, that has no function at all. It's just a piece of sculpture. It's a staircase that goes nowhere special, but it gives you a slightly different view of the park. Tschumi is playing with us here. He's asking, does every building need a purpose, or can it just be an interesting thing in space that makes you stop and think for a second? He actually said that about a third of them have no function, and he really hoped they'd stay that way.
Okay, now let's talk about the surfaces. Sprinkled throughout the park are these 10 themed gardens, and they are just wonderfully weird and poetic. They are not your typical stuffy French gardens. No, they're like these little pockets of experience. There's a dragon garden with a massive metal dragon slide for kids to play on. There's a bamboo garden that's actually sunken below ground level, so when you walk down into it, the sounds of the city completely change and the air feels different. There's even a garden of childhood frights. They're designed for you to just discover them as you wander, creating these little moments of surprise and, honestly, pure delight.
And this brings us to the lines, and specifically to this one meandering path. Tschumi was obsessed with movies, and he designed this path to unfold like a film. As you walk along it, your view is constantly being framed and reframed. A red foley will pop into view and then disappear behind a stand of trees. You turn a corner and bam, you get this stunning view of the Science Museum reflecting in the canal. You are basically the camera, the actor, and the audience all at the same time, creating your own movie just by walking.
It's this amazing idea that movement itself can be the main attraction, the real point of the park.
So, after all that theory and all that weirdness, we gotta ask the big question, did it work? Is Parc de la Villette actually a success? In Section 5, let's zoom out and take a hard look at the lasting legacy of this completely bonkers experiment.
Well, the numbers really don't lie. This is not some empty architectural idea that nobody uses. This park is absolutely thriving. A full 40% of its use is tied to these major cultural hubs. You've got the Cité des Sciences, one of the biggest science museums in Europe. You've got the jaw-dropping Philharmonie de Paris concert hall. You've got the Zenith, a massive arena for rock concerts. But then look at the rest. 30% is just people enjoying themselves, pure leisure in the gardens. 20% is for huge events, like the famous open-air film festival they hold every summer. And 10% is for sports, running, playing, and get this, parkour athletes using the Folies as their own personal jungle gym. It became exactly what Tschumi wanted, a park of culture in action.
And this quote right here, this is the whole secret. This is why it works. The ultimate success of Parc de la Villette is that it doesn't tell you how to feel or what to do. Its chaotic, pointless design is actually an invitation. It's a stage. The park is a platform for the people of Paris to come in and invent their own uses for it. Tschumi wanted the unexpected to be everywhere, and it is. The fact that a structure designed in the 1980s is now a global hotspot for parkour, a sport that barely even existed back then, is all the proof you need. The design worked. It's an open-ended piece of architecture that doesn't just allow for the unpredictable, it actively encourages it. It's a work in progress, and the people using it are the ones who are constantly finishing it.
So, we've unraveled the mystery of the park built on chaos. We've traced its journey from a city of blood to a vibrant city of culture. But what does all this mean for us, right here, right now? Well, this story doesn't just end in Paris. In a way, this is where your own journey really begins.
Here's the big idea I want you to walk away with. The spaces all around us, the buildings we work in, the parks we walk through, they are packed with incredible stories. Parc de la Villette isn't just a random collection of lawns and weird red buildings. No, it's a story about Paris's industrial past. It's a philosophical argument about what architecture can even be. It's a question that it asks every single person who walks through it. What can you create here? It teaches us that the very best design doesn't just look good. It challenges us, it makes us think, and it gives us a stage to live our lives. And once you start looking for those stories, I promise you, you will see them everywhere.
If you love digging in and finding these kinds of hidden stories in the world all around you, well, that is exactly what we are all about here. So, follow our channel, Just Necessary Design, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss our next deep dive. We really believe this conversation isn't over. Check out the link in the description for some free design guides, and then jump into the comments and let us know what you think. Is Parc de la Villette a work of total genius, or is it just a chaotic mess? We would absolutely love to hear your take. Thanks so much for hanging out, and keep asking questions.